I always thought Sesame Street was supposed to be safe. That's what my parents told me, what every adult seemed to believe. It was the show that taught you your ABCs, how to count, how to be kind. It was the background noise of my childhood, the gentle rhythm of puppets and laughter and songs drifting from the living room TV. But there's one episode I'll never forget, one that none of the grown-ups ever seemed to remember, no matter how many times I tried to bring it up. I used to think I'd imagined it, that it was just a nightmare. But I know now that it was real, and I know I wasn't the only one who saw it. It happened on a gray afternoon in late November, the kind of day when the sky hangs low and the world feels smaller. I was 6 years old, home from school with a cold, curled up on the couch with a blanket and a mug of soup. My mom was in the kitchen, humming to herself, and the TV was tuned to PBS, as always. The familiar theme song played, and I felt a little better, comforted by the sight of Big Bird and Elmo and the rest of the gang waving hello. The episode started like any other. There was a skit about sharing, a song about the letter M, and a visit from a guest star I didn't recognize. But then, about halfway through, something changed. The screen flickered, just for a second, and the colors seemed to drain away. The set looked darker, the shadows deeper. The puppets' voices sounded strange, slower, almost echoing, as if they were speaking from the bottom of a well. I remember Elmo standing in the middle of the street, looking around as if he was lost. The camera lingered on him for too long, and his eyes seemed wider than usual, his smile a little too stiff. He called out for his friends, but no one answered. The street was empty, the doors to the brownstones all closed. The only sound was the wind, whistling through the empty set. Then a new character appeared. I'd never seen him before, a tall, thin puppet with gray felt skin and long, spindly arms. His eyes were small and black, and his mouth was a straight line. He didn't have a name, at least not one I ever heard. He just stood at the end of the street, watching Elmo. The camera cut back and forth between them, the silence stretching on until it felt unbearable. Elmo finally walked toward the stranger, his voice trembling as he asked, "Do you want to be my friend?" The gray puppet didn't answer. Instead, he started to hum, a low, tuneless sound that made my skin crawl. The camera zoomed in on his face, and for a moment, I thought I saw his mouth twitch into a smile. Elmo took another step forward, but the gray puppet just stood there, humming that awful broken tune. The street seemed to get darker, the colors fading until everything was washed in gray and blue. I remember clutching my blanket tighter, feeling a coldness seep into the room that had nothing to do with my fever. Elmo's voice wavered as he asked again, "Will you play with me?" The puppet finally moved, his head tilting to one side, his eyes never blinking. He raised one long arm and pointed down the street, toward the alley that ran behind Hooper's store. The camera followed Elmo as he walked, his steps slow and uncertain. The alley was never shown on Sesame Street before, at least not like this. It was narrow and dark, the walls covered in peeling paint and strange, shadowy shapes. Elmo called out for his friends, Big Bird, Cookie Monster, even Oscar, but no one answered. The only sound was the gray puppets humming, growing louder, echoing off the brick walls. At the end of the alley, Elmo stopped. There was a door there, one I'd never seen before, painted black with no handle. The gray puppet appeared behind him, moving in that slow, jerky way, and placed a hand on Elmo's shoulder. Elmo turned to look at him, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. The puppet leaned down and whispered something in Elmo's ear, but the microphone didn't pick it up. All I heard was static, sharp, and sudden, that made me flinch. The screen flickered again, and for a split second, I thought I saw something else. A flash of white, a pair of eyes staring out from the darkness behind the door. Elmo reached out and knocked, his hand shaking. The door creaked open, and a cold blue light spilled out, washing over both puppets. The gray puppet stepped back, melting into the shadows, and Elmo was left alone, staring into the light. He took a step forward, then another, and disappeared through the door. The camera lingered on the empty alley for a long moment, the blue light flickering, the gray puppets humming, fading into silence. Then, without warning, the screen cut to black. No credits, no goodbye song, just a few seconds of static before the next program started. I sat there, frozen, my soup gone cold in my lap. My mom came in and asked if I was okay, but I couldn't answer. I just stared at the TV, waiting for Elmo to come back, for someone to say it was all just a mistake. But no one did. The rest of the day passed in a blur, and that night, I dreamed of the gray puppet, his humming echoing in the darkness. The nightmares started that night and didn't stop for weeks. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back on that empty street. The sky heavy and gray, the wind howling through the alley. Elmo would call out for help, his voice growing smaller and smaller until it was swallowed by the humming. Sometimes I'd see the gray puppet standing at the end of my bed, his eyes glinting in the dark, his mouth never moving. I'd wake up, gasping, tangled in my sheets, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. At school, I tried to tell my friends about the episode, but none of them had seen it. Some said they'd missed Sesame Street that day. Others just shrugged and changed the subject. I started to wonder if I'd imagined the whole thing, if it was just a fever dream brought on by my cold. But then a week later, I overheard two kids whispering in the hallway. They were talking about a weird episode, about Elmo, and a strange puppet, and a door that led to nowhere. Their voices were hushed, their faces pale. When I asked them about it, they clammed up, eyes darting away, as if they were afraid to say more. I tried asking my mom if she remembered the episode, but she just frowned and shook her head. "Sesame Street doesn't have scary parts," she said. "Maybe you dreamed it." I wanted to believe her, but the memory was too sharp, too real. I could still hear the humming, see the blue light spilling from the door. I started watching Sesame Street every day, hoping to see the episode again, to prove to myself that it had really happened. But it never aired. Every episode was cheerful, safe, exactly as it should be. But I wasn't the only one who remembered. Over the next few months, I started noticing little things. Kids at school drawing pictures of a tall gray puppet with black eyes, or humming that same tuneless melody under their breath. Some kids stopped watching Sesame Street altogether, saying it made them feel weird or scared. A few even said they'd seen the gray puppet outside their windows at night, just standing there, watching. I became obsessed with finding out what had happened. I wrote letters to PBS, to the Children's Television Workshop, even to the local TV station, asking about the episode. Most of the time I got polite replies saying there was no record of such an episode, that maybe I was thinking of a Halloween special or a dream. But I knew better. I knew what I'd seen. The nightmares faded eventually, but the memory never did. Even now, years later, I can still hear that humming if the house is too quiet. Still see the blue light flickering at the edge of my vision. As I got older, I tried to put it all behind me. I told myself it was just a strange childhood memory, a trick of a fevered mind. But every so often something would bring it all rushing back. A certain shade of blue, the sound of wind whistling through an alley, or the distant echo of a puppet's laugh on TV. I'd feel that old chill creep up my spine, and for a moment I'd be 6 years old again, clutching my blanket and staring at the screen in disbelief. In high school, I stumbled across an online forum dedicated to lost media, old TV shows, commercials, and episodes that had vanished without a trace. On a whim, I posted about the Sesame Street episode, describing everything I remembered: the gray puppet, the empty street, the door with no handle, the blue light. I didn't expect anyone to respond. But within a day, my inbox was flooded with messages. Some people said they remembered the episode too, down to the smallest detail. Others shared stories of their own. Different shows, different puppets, but always the same sense of unease, the same feeling that something had slipped through the cracks of children's television. A few users claimed to have tapes of old Sesame Street episodes, but none could find the one I described. It was as if the episode had been scrubbed from existence, erased from every archive and memory, except for those of the children who'd seen it. One message stood out. It was from someone who said they'd worked at PBS in the late 1980s. They didn't give their real name, just a username and a few cryptic lines. "You're not crazy. There was an episode that never should have aired. It was pulled after one broadcast. The master tape was destroyed, but sometimes things have a way of coming back." That message haunted me. I started digging deeper, searching for any mention of the episode in old TV listings, newspaper archives, or production notes. I found nothing official, but every so often I'd come across a comment or a post from someone who remembered the gray puppet or the humming, the door. It was always the same story. One viewing, then nothing. No reruns, no VHS tapes, no mention in any official guide. I started to wonder if the episode was more than just a mistake, more than a lost tape. Maybe it was something that wasn't supposed to exist, something that slipped through the cracks for just one afternoon before being pulled back into the shadows. Maybe that's why the adults never remembered, why the official records were blank. Maybe it was only meant for us, the children who saw it, who still carried the memory like a scar. I never stopped searching for answers, even as the years went by and life moved on. College, work, relationships, they all came and went. But the memory of that episode lingered, a quiet presence in the back of my mind. Sometimes, late at night, I'd find myself scrolling through old message boards, reading stories from people who'd seen things they couldn't explain. The details were always eerily similar. A show that felt wrong, a character that didn't belong, a moment when the world seemed to tilt and the safe, familiar glow of the TV turned cold and strange. One night, I got an email from someone who claimed to have found a fragment of the episode. It was just a few seconds of footage, grainy and warped, but as soon as I clicked play, I knew it was real. The video showed the empty street, the colors washed out, the wind blowing trash past the closed doors. In the distance, Elmo stood alone, his head bowed, his voice barely audible as he called out for help. Then, just before the clip ended, the gray puppet appeared at the edge of the frame, his eyes fixed on the camera, his mouth curving into that thin, unnatural smile. I watched the clip over and over, my heart pounding, my hands shaking. It was proof that I hadn't imagined it, that I wasn't alone. I shared the video on the forum, and within hours, it had been taken down. The user who sent it to me deleted their account, and every trace of the clip vanished from the internet. But I'd seen it. I knew it was real. After that, the dreams came back, sharper and more vivid than before. I'd find myself standing in the alley behind Hooper's store, the blue light spilling from the door, the gray puppets humming, filling the air. Sometimes I'd see other children there, their faces pale and frightened, their eyes wide with recognition. We never spoke, but I knew we were all there for the same reason, to remember, to bear witness to something the world wanted to forget. I started to wonder if the episode was a warning, a message hidden in the static and shadows. Maybe it was meant to teach us something, not about letters or numbers, but about fear, about the things that lurk just out of sight. Or maybe it was just a mistake, a glitch in the system that let something slip through that was never meant for children's eyes. Whatever the truth, I know I'll never forget that day. I'll never forget the gray puppet, the humming, the door with no handle. And if you ever find yourself watching Sesame Street on a gray afternoon, and the colors start to fade, and the street grows quiet, remember this. Some episodes aren't meant to be seen twice. Sometimes I wonder how many of us are still out there, grown-ups now, scattered across the country, each carrying the same uneasy memory. Maybe we all try to explain it away, blaming childhood imagination or a bad dream. But deep down, we know what we saw. I've met a few others over the years, online and in person, and there's always a moment of silent understanding when the gray puppet comes up. We don't need to describe the humming or the blue light. We just nod, and for a moment, we're 6 years old again, shivering in front of the TV, waiting for the world to go back to normal. I've learned to live with it. The nightmares come and go, but they don't scare me like they used to. If anything, they remind me that I'm not alone. Sometimes when I hear the Sesame Street theme song in a store or see a clip online, I feel a pang of nostalgia mixed with dread. I wonder if the episode is still out there somewhere, waiting to be found again, or if it's truly gone for good. Maybe it's buried in a vault, or maybe it was never really a tape at all, just a story that slipped through the cracks, a shadow that passed over the sunniest street in the world. I still watch Sesame Street sometimes, with my own kids now. I make sure to sit with them, to keep the volume low, to watch for any flicker of gray or blue that doesn't belong. I tell myself it was just a one-time thing, a glitch, a mistake that could never happen again. But every so often I catch my daughter staring at the screen a little too intently, her brow furrowed, her eyes wide, and I wonder if she sees something I don't, if the gray puppet is still out there, waiting for a new friend. If you're reading this and you remember that episode, know that you're not alone. We may never get answers, and the world may never believe us, but we know what we saw. We remember the silence, the humming, the door that led to nowhere, and maybe that's enough. Maybe the real lesson wasn't about letters or numbers, but about the things we carry with us, the memories that shape us, the shadows that sometimes fall, even on the brightest days. So if you ever find yourself on Sesame Street, and the colors start to fade, and the wind picks up, and you hear a low, tuneless humming from somewhere just out of sight, turn off the TV. Hold your loved ones close. And remember, not every episode is meant to be remembered, but some will never let you forget.